Okay, well, I'll keep going.
Outside the front door is a stern-looking individual, not somebody you recognize. Human from the looks of it, maybe upper 30s, early 40s, who has a firearm at his side of some kind and seems to be sort of tracking you as you approach the front door.
Tip my non-existent hat to him.
As he sees you guys approach, he says, "What's your business here?"
Well, howdy there, sir. We got us an appointment with the Countess. We set it up yesterday. She agreed to meet us.
He nods. He says, "Very well. She's been expecting you. Come on inside." And he kind of steps away from the door just enough to reach over to it, turn the knob, and open it with his arm.
All right, surety do.
But not blocking the door frame anyway, so you can pass through. You guys go inside?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to, in passing, lots of hard eye contact and a polite nod.
Okay.
Hard eye contact, and then a graceful bow.
Don't you ever fucking... Hey. He returns the nod. Just very subtle. And then goes back to training his eyes outward. Closes the door behind you after you enter. Doesn't lock or anything. Just, On the inside, the interior sort of matches what you saw on the outside, which is to say, this looks like a normal home. Even the Duchess, even though she really only had the one servant, for example, still had all these elaborate rooms and, a lot of just superfluous stuff. This looks like a very utilitarian house. It's got a nice-sized kitchen and sitting room area in this main open first part of this first floor, but all of it is relatively normal stuff. The impression you're getting is that Lorena is she's of the people. She's cut from the same cloth as the people that she leads in a way that a lot of others that you've encountered have definitely not. Because even like a Whitworth Thorogood, his manner was also very opulent and over the top. That's not the vibe you get from here. Both of you make a perception check.
Oh, God. Not good.
It could be. You don't know that.
No, just my perception is...
I know.
Actually, no, I'm average. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Nat 20.
My goodness.
What's up?
So I got a 23, but crash critted.
Okay.
Less than mine, but that's okay.
The thing that you guys notice in addition to all that is the room is laid out in such a way that there's open space in places you wouldn't expect it. It's difficult to understand because, interior design is not necessarily your forte, but from looking around, it just seems like there is more to this room than meets the eye. And Karash, on a crit, you're not super familiar with machinery, but you've encountered some of it, and there was even a bit of it on the boat that you worked on. There are a couple of places in this kitchen in particular that you can see there's a crease in the wall that would seem like either a door or a compartment or something that you don't see anything that would activate it on the outside, but you can tell there's a very thin slab, but it's just something that catches your eye as that's supposed to be just a regular wall, but there's definitely more to it than that.
Okay.
As you guys take this in, there is a female half-elf that rounds the corner. She has short, wavy, white hair, piercing blue eyes. She is pretty short by half-elf standards. She's really maybe just a hair over 5 foot, which is on the very low side for them. But has kind of this fierce is almost too strong, but a determined demeanor. As she approaches, you get kind of a closer look at her. There's just a variety of small scars and scratches across her skin. Not seemingly from battle, just from someone who has worked in some kind of field that has taken a toll over time. She kind of looks at the two of you as she comes into this main room, and she says, "Well, I welcome you. I am Lorene de Grey, and I'm told you requested an audience with me today.
Oh, we sure did, Lorene. How you doing?
Well, as always, I am only as good as my business is doing, but business has been pretty decent recently, so I'm doing pretty decent. How about yourselves?
Well, Karash and I are just pleased as punch to hear it. Ain't we, Karash?
Punch is pleasing.
Oh, correct. He has a sense of humor. You gotta just ignore him. So we just had a couple questions for you. We're new to town. We're just kind of coming on through, and Karash had some questions about other folk that kind of look like him. So Karash, I'll let you lead with that.
Have you seen other Dragonborn that looked like me? What he said.
She kind of gives you this sort of disarming smile because you seem almost nervous to her. And she says, I can't say I have recently, no. There have been reports of a couple in the area. I've heard of some passing through at times, but the last time I think I heard of that was months ago. I don't think I've heard of anything recently in this town since then, and I keep pretty good tabs on it. I've heard of some in the surrounding areas, but I couldn't speak to them.
Do you know names?
I do not know. Unfortunately, unless they did business through the vault that we have, I don't keep tabs on everybody who passes through as far as their names and such. It was more of a general sense of who might have been passing through, and, well, it's almost disparaging to say it like this, but let's just call a spade a spade. Dragonborn tend to stick out a bit more than other folks.
Well, yes, we are.
You sure do. Look at you. You're like a big blue sore thumb. Yeah, ain't he? Well, we're just simple folk here, and just had some questions. That being the biggest one. We're trying to find the folks looking like Karash and that nature. I had a question myself. It's a horrible thing going around. Bunch of dukes and dukeses getting murdered. And we just wanted to make sure nothing like that nature was happening in this town. Have you seen anything suspicious?
The response you get is sort of not what you're expecting, in the sense that she kind of almost laughs at this. Not dismissively, but just at the idea that, people around here have been getting killed, and that's not what the response you might expect in general. She says, oh, I'm very aware. Some folks have been meeting an untimely end, especially to the east of here. But we largely keep to ourselves here, and I'd like to think that I'm connected enough and defended enough that I'm not in any real danger. It also helps that, it'll sound like boasting, but most people here hold me in pretty high regard. And from the sound of it, some of the other folks that were attacked or killed were a little bit less popular with their constituencies than I am.
I do have to say, it warms my heart watching this area. You live like the common folk, and I think that's really great. There's no mansion here, not like that chap in Falstock with the wall. What's that about?
She laughs at this too. She says, ha, yes, Thorogood. Wouldn't have minded him being one of the ones who perished. I was kind of disappointed when I heard that someone tried and failed. But, can't always get things the way you want them to in life. But yes, I think it's important. I think a ruler is only as good as the people they lead. And if you pretend to be above that station, there's always going to be that disconnect where people might like you, but they're going to assume you don't understand where they're coming from. I do. I worked my way up from the ground level. And I'd like to think that helps me have a leg up with the people around here, because they know I'm like them in a lot of ways.
I nudge Karash. I'm like, I'm in love.
As you do that, I've had a distracted look on my face for the last few seconds as you guys have been talking, completely zoned out, and then as you hit me, I go, "Your walls have defenses." And that's more like a statement, not a question.
Mm-hmm. She looks a little bit surprised at that. She says,
So do I.
yeah. She kind of gives you a grin too. She seems bemused by just everything about you guys overall. And she gives you a grin, Crash, and she says, "I'm surprised you noticed. They're pretty well disguised to the point where most folks, if they come in here for the first time, don't see them. But yes, I do."
I will tell no one.
What is it? Is that like a safety room? I imagine this realm that all the dukes and dukesses go to once everybody's getting murdered. Is that what you got here?
She kind of shakes her head. She says, "No, nothing like that. And I would like to go into more detail, but first I have to ask you a question."
Oh, well, shucks. You wanting to know something about us? I am more than obliged.
Oh.
She says, "Now, I don't imagine that you're here under false pretenses, but I'm just curious as to who you really are." And she's looking directly in your direction, Isaac.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She says, as you probably have already heard, it's my business to know who is and is not in this town. And having heard about the meeting you wanted to have, I looked into you folks last night. I will say everything I heard was largely positive, but I guess my question is, why are you here, Isaac Dryden?
She
Man.
found the defenses in your walls.
People just can't keep secrets, it appears, anymore. Well, where to start? So you know my father, then, I'm assuming? You said you were very connected.
Oh, how could I not have heard of the great Margrave Dryden, hero to the land, ruler of Timberbrook, beloved by all who see him.
What?
Your tone makes me think he's not as... we both see through how beloved he actually is.
I can't say I know all the details, but let's just say I don't trust him as far as I can throw him.
Well, I'll just tell you, it's very good that you feel that way, because it's even worse than you could probably imagine.
She nods. She says, I hear whispers. I've gone to the city and found it to be a fine place. Nice, bustling. But I wouldn't do business with Margrave Dryden. Every time I've been even in his vicinity, there's just this unease that sets in. I don't trust him one bit.
It appears you have a very good intuition for who's good and who is not. I suppose that's as useful in conducting your business.
Kind of has to be. It was that way out of necessity, really. And I apologize for being forward. It's just I wanted to make sure you were here under the right pretenses.
No, I mean, the accent is fun, but this is... I prefer to be much more direct.
I'd like to explain a couple different things that I've heard and maybe give you some context for what's happening here, but I also know there were more companions in your group. It might be worthwhile to get them here as well, if you don't mind.
Well, I agree with you. One of them is a lazy hobo, Tessian of Blackwater, so maybe hobo doesn't apply. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but you knew that already.
Yes, well, I suppose it's only fair that I tell you. I spoke to Cavis Robintero.
Ah, yes.
Good friend of mine, and he had nice things to say, and which is rare for Cavis. He's a little gruff on the exterior. You probably have met him as well and would know as much. But
apparently he has a big mouth, too.
Well, I don't think he would tell just anyone, but we go back a ways, let's just say.
I like him.
Well, yes, Tessian and his girlfriend's name. It's been 6 weeks. I forgot.
Thea.
I'm not helping you.
Thea are in a hotel room, probably just playing a board game or something, and
They're playing Twister.
yeah. Greya Lightghost is at her farm, actually, along with Lena, of whom we are accompanying on her pilgrimage, the Countess, which I'm sure you already know as well.
She nods. She says, I didn't ask a ton about the others who weren't in the city, but he at least mentioned those things, yes.
So if you'd prefer, we can wait. I can go get Tessian again. But, I mean, the others, I'm sure we could arrange to have everybody here. I'll defer to you. Would you want to wait a few days until we can get all of our companions here?
She thinks for a moment. She says, I suppose it's up to you and how you'd like to approach this. At the very least, it seems like it would be appropriate to bring Tessian and his companion here because they're in the city. If you'd like to wait for the others, I'll be here for a few days and can make that happen, or you can just pass on my information to them. I'll leave it to you.
Well, I suppose we can start with Tessian and go from there. So I'll turn and go, but I'll say, but before I go, you asked what brings us to this town, and truthfully, we were looking for more Dragonborn. But then something caught my eye. It's your vault. I was curious into if my father has had any dealings with this vault, and if he has, it could be important for us to know, but I would want to work with you. And I suppose the starting place is, has he done business here?
There was one point a few years ago where he tried, and I turned him down. But for the most part, he's pretty much kept to himself. And that's just as well by me. The one time he wanted to place something here, I refused. We never got so far as to find out what it was because I was against the idea in principle. But I'm thinking a man of his stature doesn't need help stashing things in places that are hard to get.
Probably true. Okay, we will be back soon with your leave.
She nods and...
Yeah, I'll nod. As soon as we get out of the room, though, I'm going to start asking you about how big your father is.
How big?
Yep.
Well, Karash, when you ask me how big, I suppose I have to ask, do you mean literally or like ego?
No, how large is he that she could throw him?
Ah, okay. So, yes, literally, in which I don't have to really care about this answer. He's an average human size. I suppose, to give him background, is he like a pretty big guy, or is he very normal size?
Pretty big by human standards, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you know him obviously better than anybody. He stands a full 6'5". He's probably a good 240 or so. Pretty muscular.
He's obnoxiously big for a human.
So she cannot throw him.
I actually don't know. She looked pretty tough. I wouldn't count her out.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, I am locking eyes with you. I'm not just walking. When you do these looks, I'm just looking at you. I'm waiting for you to finish. I'm trying to give you power, Courage.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I'm piecing the puzzle together in my mind.
So by the time we get back to Tessian's door, how much time has elapsed?
Probably a good 40, 45 minutes.
Okay, I kick the door. Like the bottom of the door. And I say, Tessian, the Countess, she wants to see all of us. Is that enough to get you out of bed?
And Tessian's like, yes. One moment. Some shuffling.
All right, I'm going to sit leaning against the wall right outside of his door.
The door opens. Tessian's there.
I think she'd like to see Thea, too.
And Thea, who's out of bed and dressed and in the corner kind of gathering her possessions, she says, oh, well, that is quite the honor indeed.
Yes, let's go.
Tessian makes sure he grabs his things, but he'll ask. He's like, so, what is this about then?
Well, it's the funniest thing. I'll tell you on the way. And I just explained the whole charade. She saw right through it. And she's very well informed about us because Cavis can't keep a secret. Which I say mostly in jest. And, yeah, just let him know.
If you even try to talk about the walls, I'm going to try and stop you.
I didn't.
I'm just saying.
Puts his hand over your mouth and just goes, shh, 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 shh. Don't speak.
And
so, Thea and Tessian join you. You'll make your way back to De Grey's house of residence. Guard doesn't even question you this time.
Again.
even though you have 2 extra people than last time, it seems either he's already aware or has been tipped off in the interim, so he just lets all 4 of you pass inside.
Karash rudely gives him another polite stare.
Rudely, another polite stare. Yep, that's true. That's the walking contradiction
Yep.
of the thunder. And as you go inside, Lorene is now seated in the sitting area, and beckons the 4 of you all to come join her. And what are nice but not especially fancy couches. Look comfy though.
Tessian sits down. You know, he's gonna be polite. You know.
Yeah, I'll sit down.
Well, Lorene, we're all here, and I would say you should probably start. If we get Tessian talking, who knows how long we could be here for, so please lead us off.
Tessian does sort of like hold the hand up to like be like, please stop. But he does say, Tessian Black, it's a pleasure to meet you, Countess.
Likewise. When I heard that you were one of the companions, I was especially intrigued. You and Miss Goldpetal here as well. It's interesting. We don't often get... I mean, to call it nobility would be mean sounding to the commoners, but we don't often get fancy folks in this town. It's usually more regular folk who they have something that they treasure that they want to hold on to. But I'm pleased to meet your acquaintance, both of you.
Tessia nods. It's a wonderful, quaint little town you've got over here, and you've done quite well for yourself. I applaud you, and your ability to maintain, well, as I'm sure you've discussed, given your knowledge of the situation with Isaac, things are a little chaotic elsewhere. So, kudos to you.
She kind of nods. She says, you know, I like to think that we keep things kind of humble and unassuming here overall. The biggest thing is we're trying not to attract attention. And I know that sounds sort of contradictory when you think about what's in the town, but for the most part, when people come, they realize what a thorough system we have, and they don't really try to mess with it. And that is good. It gives our clients some level of privacy, but it also keeps us from, well, let's just say, from being under Timberbrook's watchful eye too often. She kind of stands up at this point. She walks back over to the kitchen area, and she says, now, your friend Karash here noticed something when he came in. At this point, she sort of does like a Fonzie hit the wall next to where the spot opens up. And the wall essentially folds down, and a conveyor belt is exposed that seems to head into some back room. It's kind of fancy. I mean, you've seen these once before. You saw them at the Sanguine Stronghold. They were being used to move people. Well,
it was going to say, Lorene, I hope you don't mind. Our last run-in with conveyor belts was in not a very savory place. Can you do me a favor and assure me that this is far better nature than that was?
And you watch as the conveyor belt starts spinning. She doesn't respond right away, but outside of the conveyor belt comes a platter that has a pitcher of water on it, as well as a handful of what look like, ladyfinger type cookies.
Yeah. I relax and I say, oh, this is much better.
Yes. She says, well, this is the problem with technology, though, isn't it? It's only as good as the people who use it. And she brings them back and sets them down on the table in front of you guys, along with some glasses for the water.
The dogs are barking.
And a dog comes down the conveyor belt.
Lorene?
She says, the reason I was so forward with you, Isaac, in particular, is this town still has some connections to the Gears. And it's interesting because we don't necessarily want that to be common knowledge. As you may know from your history books, the Gears are sort of looked down upon because of their role in the War of Calamity. And I trust Cavis, which is why I'm willing to say this in front of you, despite the fact that there are people who are nobility, and she kind of looks in Tessian's direction, or connected to nobility, and she looks in your direction, Isaac. I trust that this is confidential, but I myself am not actually of noble blood. There is magic lineage in my history, but I am technically not fit to run this town.
That explains so much, Lorene. You have no idea. And I look at Tessian. It explains so much. Please continue. Sorry.
Tessian is pouring water out for like people who want water. in on this triangle.
Pouring on the floor.
Went out for your homies.
Yeah,
Oh, you're not nobility, are you? Well, then.
He's pouring out water, but he gets distracted because he's mad at you, so the cup overflows. And
He's got the glass for Isaac, and then Isaac just makes a shitty comment and just puts it on the floor.
pours it back in the pitcher with some backwash. She says, it's what makes this town so interesting to me and why it's important to protect. There are others here who have connections to back then as well. And it's why the firearm usage is kept under control. I basically only allow my personal guard to have them because if we had too many, once again, that would attract attention that I am not interested in, because even if we could handle some incursion of some sort, I wouldn't want our people to be put in the middle of that. But I've heard about your group. I've heard about the things that you've done. I know you have no love for at least what appears to be the more corrupt among us and the nobles. But I also know that there are nobles who are good. And that's what makes this so complicated for me, because I don't want to raise too much attention, not only because of the town, as I've mentioned, but also because of myself. I can fake magical ability, but I don't actually possess any. And I hesitate to think who might be instilled in this place if I were replaced.
Etesian's, he's like, that's a valid concern. You're right to keep this under wraps. There are many who would challenge your position and potentially be installed for ill will.
We have no reason to want that, Lorraine. So I have to ask, if you don't mind, why are you telling us this?
Well, when a Dryden walks into my town, pretending to be someone they're not, my natural inclination is to be a bit suspicious at first. Which is why I arranged the meeting. Again, once I had found out some background information, it doesn't seem like you are the standard cut from the Dryden cloth form, but I still have my reservations. That's why I had to be forward with you when you came in. I didn't really have too many doubts about it, and on the off chance you and Karash had tried anything, there were some measures put in place just in case, but I hear the name Dryden, I immediately assume the worst.
As you're wont to do, that's perfectly understandable. And all of this is appreciated. I was under the impression maybe you were building towards... Let me back up. We are, as a secondary function, interested in exposing the corruption that plagues this country. And I suppose I let my hopes get high that maybe you had some ideas for how to do that.
She kind of thinks on this for a second. She says, it's kind of above my pay grade in a lot of ways, but I mean, I have general ideas. In one sense, what you've been doing helps with that quite a bit. I know there's been pressure on Whitworth Thorogood, even though he was not taken out of the picture. The fact that someone raised a scene like that resulted in some questions being asked of him from up above in Waychester. They largely keep out of town's business, but when things happen and they're forced to intervene, it's a bad look for them. So at the very least, what you're doing is helping in that respect. I don't know if I can say that I'm a fan of removing them entirely, but if there was a way to get them out of the seat of power without killing them, perhaps that would be the better approach.
What is the relationship there? As far as you know, is it one of their men was exposed to maybe having some corruption, or was it more one of their minions got out of line? I'm trying to get their alignment.
Kind of depends. I've heard of both situations happening. There are some towns where they are so thoroughly corrupt as to be almost unsalvageable. I've heard of especially lawless areas to the south of the desert where if you're a regular person, you should stay far away, because that corruption seeps through beyond just the leadership and their connections to almost everybody in the town. And there are some, some that Cavus gives me the impression that you've experienced at this point, where they are mostly good, with just a festering head that would need to be cut off.
It concerns me that you think there's a chance that this corruption has infected all the way up to the top.
She says, I don't know if it's all the way to the top. Once a year, most of the nobility essentially travels to Waychester for a more formal event, and so I've had dealings with the Empress in the past. She seems like a benevolent ruler. There could be more going on there than meets the eye, but not only my impressions of her personally, and I like to think I'm a decent judge of character, but also anybody else who has interacted with her, including Cavus, have very little but good to say about her. But she is just one person, and even though she runs everything in this country, there's a level of division of power that could mean that anybody close to her could have been turned. There's her personal guard. I can't speak to it with any much authority on it, unfortunately, because my time in Waychester has been pretty limited, but I think someone in that hierarchy has turned at some point. I couldn't say who, and I certainly hope it's not the Empress herself, but I'm not sure how widespread it is.
Well, you have, and Cavus have good intuition for people, so I'm inclined to take your word for it that at the very least the Empress herself is good.
She kind of nods. She says, again, I can only hope so. If she's able to pull the veil over everyone's eyes, then we truly are lost.